Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My amendment is uncontroversial and important to our national interest. Under Chairwoman Waters' bill, she agreed with Republicans to restrict EXIM financing for Chinese state-owned enterprises that were involved in a number of activities contrary to the national interest. We had this debate yesterday regarding the amendment from Mr. McHenry. These included company involvement in human rights abuses, military and intelligence activities, corruption, the Belt and Road Initiative, and the theft of U.S. intellectual property. While it is obvious to Republicans that the EXIM subsidies for Chinese government-controlled companies that engage in such activities is outrageous, certain Democrat members objected. Perhaps the list was too extensive for them. Maybe our Democrat friends agreed with us on parts of the list, but not others. That's why I am now offering an amendment that would only prohibit EXIM support for the Chinese government and the entities it controls if the President can't report to Congress that China is complying with its obligations under the Sino-British Joint Declaration, the international treaty signed in 1984 that lays out the one country, two systems policy towards Hong Kong and ensures certain rights for Hong Kongers until the year 2047, including freedom of speech and assembly. The one country, two systems principle allows Hong Kong to retain its capitalist system. As we all know, the brave men and women in Hong Kong have been taking to the streets to protest China's continuous encroachment on Hong Kong's liberties. They have ample reason to be worried, since even 2 years ago, before the protests started, the Chinese Foreign Ministry had said that the Sino-British Joint Declaration, quote, no longer has any practical significance, and it is not at all binding for the central government's management of Hong Kong, unquote. Well, Congress should certainly affirm that the Sino-British Joint Declaration has practical significance. It is binding on the Chinese government. If the Chinese want to shred this document and seek to suppress freedom in Hong Kong, just as Beijing suppresses freedom on the mainland, then the Export-Import Bank shouldn't validate the government by providing taxpayer-backed financial assistance. This amendment is silent on other Chinese policies. It does not, for example, make EXIM support contingent on changes to IP theft or to the Belt and Road Initiative. It doesn't even require progress on human rights outside of Hong Kong. The only condition Beijing has to meet under this amendment is in order to keep receiving EXIM subsidies, is to uphold its obligation under its treaty with respect to Hong Kong. That is all. To make this amendment even more straightforward for my Democrat colleagues, there are exceptions built in for small businesses and humanitarian exports, just as there were in Chairwoman Waters' original bipartisan bill. There's also a national interest waiver. So again, we all recognize that there were some Democrats who felt that the Chairwoman's bipartisan bill was too tough on the Chinese Communist Party. They felt that taxpayer-backed financing should be able to benefit Beijing without any conditions, even if Republicans felt that those conditions were no-brainers. Well, now we have just one single condition in my amendment, and it has to do with China's abiding by formal commitments to the people of Hong Kong. The Financial Services Committee has an opportunity now to stand with Hong Kong by adopting this amendment. The Export-Import Bank has no place subsidizing the Chinese government while it's cracking down on demonstrators in Hong Kong. I urge my colleagues to adopt my amendment. I urge my colleagues to stand with the freedom-loving people of Hong Kong, to stand in defiance of Chinese communist oppression, and support this amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will yield.
Sure. I appreciate the ranking member of the Oversight Subcommittee for offering this important amendment. I commend Mr. Barr for coming up with a thoughtful approach. We see what is happening night after night in Hong Kong. And in the Financial Services Committee, we have very little opportunity to do anything about it. But what we can say right now is that we should not use taxpayer-backed financing to fund the agents that are committing these atrocities in Hong Kong against free peoples that many of whom are waving the American flag as they protest Chinese oppression. So let's stand with a unified voice and say that we should not subsidize that type of behavior by the Chinese state. and I yield back.